of this will be put up in the chat box. Now, today we have with us Team Tarini. The Tarini Foundation aims to improve the sexual, menstrual, and reproductive health standards of women across different communities and age groups. Today, they'll be talking to us about topics that are extremely relevant and need to be talked about, but they still remain a taboo. Now, I hand over the platform to Team Tarini. We have with us Janvi, Ira, and Anupriya. I hand it over to you guys now.
Hi everyone. Good evening. Hope you all had a good day. So my name is Janvi and my fellow educators are Ira and Anupriya. So this is our first time conducting a workshop. We are very nervous but excited. And we'll make sure that when you leave this workshop, you leave with the right kind of information and the confidence. And most importantly, please don't hesitate. Ask us questions in any language that you want, Hindi or English, whatever you're comfortable with. And just don't hesitate. And this is a judgment-free zone. So before I dive in, I just want to give a brief introduction about Tani Foundation. So Tani Foundation is a group that advocates and generate awareness about sexual reproductive health rights, sustainable menstruation, and menstrual health management across communities, on fields, online and offline. And if you want to know more about Tani Foundation, you can, of course, follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram under the handle Team Tani. So, we are going to talk about sexual health, and a lot of things, come under sexual health. And before we talk about what sexual health entails, it's very important to know what sexual health is. What is the definition of sexual health? And of course, I'm going to talk about it. But before that, why don't you guys tell me, what do you think sexual health is? Don't hesitate. Any language is fine, Hindi or English, whatever you're comfortable with. Anything that comes in your mind when I say the term sexual health. There's no right or wrong answers. So anything that comes in your mind when I say sexual health. Anyone?
Menstrual hygiene is a very big part of sexual health.
Yes.
And keeping, what should I say, your reproductive organs or the parts involved with reproduction and menstruation, keeping them healthy and hygienic.
Yes. No, everything comes in sexual health. There are no right or wrong answers. So, thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Anything that crops up in your mind when I say sexual health? Okay, so so we have seen, okay, I think someone has written something on the chat. Yes. So we have seen over the years emphasis on sexual health has increased, which is fortunate. And when we talk about the term sexual health, so as a layman, I perceive sexual health as reproductive health in general, which it is. But sexual health, also goes beyond that. So it's a state it's the state of your physical, mental, social, emotional well-being, which is in relation to your sexuality, and it is not just the mere absence of diseases. So sexual health also requires us to have a positive and a respectful approach to our sexuality, our sexual experiences, and our sexual relationships. So sexual health, most importantly, is something which is free from caution, which is forcefulness. It's free from discrimination. It's free from violence. And for sexual health to be maintained and attained, the sexual rights of all persons must be respected, protected, and fulfilled. So, our sexual rights play a very critical role in our sexual health. So what are these rights? These rights are our right to equality, our right to non-discrimination, our right to privacy, our right to information and education, and many more. So, when we talk about sexual health, we think that, we are talking about sexual health amongst youth, among young people. But sexual health is something that's relevant, throughout one individual's lifespan. It is relevant and important for people who are elderly, who are young, who are in the prime years of their reproductive time, and people who have crossed that prime year. So it's important for all. There's no age bar for sexual health. And similarly, there's no, one specified sexuality that comes under sexual health. So sexual health is something that is expressed through diverse sexualities and forms of sexual expression. So, just give me a second. Yeah. So sexual health is also, the knowledge that sex doesn't have to be necessarily penetrative. We can have different ways of, sexual intimacy and pleasure. And it's okay to explore your options. And sorry. And sexual health is also a reminder for us that sex isn't some high pressure competitive event. It can look and feel like however you want it to be. And there are different forms of feeling pleasure. There are different forms of feeling intimacy, and different forms work for different people. So there's no one right form. Do whatever that works for you. So, so while I conclude this topic of sexual health, I want you to understand that the purpose of sexual health is to make you informed, is to, give you the right kind of information, and that there is nothing right or wrong. And when you engage in certain activity, make sure that your consent is involved and your partner's consent is involved. And just because you consent to something, that does not automatically translate consent for everything. So your consent has to be specific. And whilst you are on your journey of exploring and expressing yourself, make sure you are happy, you are healthy, and you do things at your pace. And yeah, so we'll go in detail about sexual health. And now I request Ira to please share the difference between safe versus safer when we talk about sexual health.
Yes, thank you, Janvi. Hi, everyone. So I'll just briefly talk about safe versus safer sex. So basically, safer sex refers to anything which reduces our risk to any kind of sexually transmitted infection. But I would also like to clarify that no matter how safe you are in terms of any kind of sexual activity that you're engaged in, nothing is 100% safe. So, but that does not mean that you do not take protection, that you do not use protection or take extra measures. But just a reminder that nothing is absolutely safe, or nothing is absolutely safe in that matter. So when we talk about safer sex, it is protecting yourself and your partner or your partners from sexually transmitted infections. So it not only helps you live a healthy life, but also helps you have a better sex life, because you know that you are healthy in terms of your physical self, so you can engage in sexual activities more. So when I was thinking about it, I had this question, that how does safer sex help protect me from STIs? So there are infections, as we all know, that are passed on from one person who might have got it from somebody else to another person. And anybody who has engaged in oral, anal, or sex, or vaginal, skin to skin genital contact, and who might have shared sexual fluids, can get infected with a sexually transmitted infection. So safer sex helps us keep ourselves safe from
any kind of infection that could have severe consequences for our physical cells. So it basically, like I said, I'll say it again, it means protecting yourself from any kind of sexual infection. And the best ways, as we all know, are to use protection, like external condoms as well as internal condoms that you can use if you're engaging in any kind of sexual activity, not just penetrative, but also during oral, because sexually transmitted infections, they can pass on through oral sex as well, and also, yeah, through penetrative, as I said. So these barriers which you use, you should use them not only during sex, but you can also use them if you share sex toys with somebody. So they can be passed on through sex toys as well. So it's better to put on a barrier on them, on your sex toys too. So yeah, and another very, very important part, I think this is the most important thing, is that getting tested for STIs. So a lot of times people do use these barriers, but even then they get infected with sexually transmitted infections and illnesses. So like, it's very important to use condoms, dental dams, all sorts of protection methods. It's also very important to get yourself tested. So as I said, most people, they don't even know if they have STDs, because a lot of them, a lot of these STIs, they do not really show symptoms at first. So since you do not really know that you have it, you would engage in a sexual activity with somebody else, and you would pass it on to that person if you do it without any protection. So testing is the only way to find out if you have been infected with something. And it's also very important because you will get to know at what stage you're at, and you can get the right medical attention that's required. So, but there are activities which are sexual and which are not necessarily penetrative, and they can help you staying safe from STIs, and they could be mutual masturbation or just intercourse with your partner or your partners. And this will help you achieve sexual pleasure and also be safe from any sort of STI. But please, I would again like to say, please make sure if you're engaging in any sexual activity, please use protection. But if you do not wish to, that's also your choice. But please make an informed one to protect yourself and others from any sort of infection. So to talk more about this, I would really like Anupriya to shed some light on STIs.
Good evening, everyone. I hope I am audible and my voice is clear. Any one of you? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so hello everyone. I hope you all are doing very well. And as Janvi and Ira have initially talked about sexual health, as well as Ira mentioned about how it is not it is never 100% safe, but actually we can make everything safer, every process safer. So that is very well said. As well as she talked about STIs and STDs, and I hope that many of you present here might be having any idea what basically STIs are and what are STDs and what is the difference. Does anyone have any idea about or would like to just say anything regarding that? And if any of you just can answer if you want, like okay, so I just hope that many of you must be knowing something, but it's okay if you don't want to answer. But basically, I would just start with what STIs are and STDs are. So STIs are sexually transmitted infections, whereas STDs are sexually transmitted diseases. The difference between two is just the difference between an infection and an diseases. And actually, during the disease may or may not be led by just a second, guys. I'm is my voice clear now? I hope there are no disturbances, and if there are, just avoid that. So, basically, continuing with that. So, it happens many times that diseases might or might not be led by any infections, but for sure, if we leave the infections untreated, then that might lead to severe, many more complications in your future and to your health as well. So, basically, how these STIs are transmitted, as Ira very well mentioned before, that they are transmitted if bodily fluids are exchanged, and this can happen in many ways, like using same utensils, using same razors without even cleaning them, or using some whatever you use, like for your sexual cleaning or sexual pleasures, the tools you use, the toys you use might not be that clean, and you might share them, which is not a good habit, and it is also included in high risk behaviors actually. So avoid such things. By kissing also, you may pass STIs to your partner or partners, whomever you are kissing, as well as this is, but mainly predominantly said that it is, also it is true that it is usually through sexual contact, and be it like sex, like penetrative, oral, anal, or vaginal, or any other kind of sex you are having. So every time we just need to be more careful and make it safer to avoid these STIs. And these STIs are basically of different types. Like they can be virus based, they can be based on bacteria, and many of them can be parasitical too. Like trichomoniasis is one of the STIs, which is based on parasitic, which is actually parasitical STI, and whereas chlamydia is is an bacterial STI. And basically, 8 of these pathogens, which we are known, are directly linked to STIs and STDs, which are syphilis, we have heard of it, and gonorrhea, chlamydia, trichomoniasis. I can name many more than, like HIV is one of the very common term that we will be even talking about it further in this workshop too. And it is actually really like, obviously it will be explained further, but other than that, there is herpes, there is hepatitis B, and there is HPV. HPV is another there are like these HPV is something that for which we have vaccines too, but many of the doctors in India don't include in the vaccination cards that we receive at the birth of the child. And it is very sad to highlight, but still in India there exist vaccinations too. So like all of these STIs, there is a lot of stigma around this. I would say, why I'm saying stigma, because we don't discuss about it. We never talk about STIs and STDs, whereas these are as simple as cold. Like we can compare them actually, because these are as commonly spread as a cold. Like when you kiss a partner, you may like catch a cold. That if your partner is having a cold, and same is with STI, as well as most of these STIs which we don't even recognize due to lack of information. And most of the STIs that just because we haven't got ourselves tested, we just don't reach the state of treatment. Whereas their treatment is so easy that due to just through a course of 3 to 5 days, having some antivirals, and these small treatment, these are just as common as the way you treat your cold is similar is to STIs. So basically, the stigma existing here in our society is not making a point right now, and we really need this workshop is basically for that only, that so that we can give you the information required, and you are making your choices as well as making your decisions on a very informed basis. So I will really tell you that why I am focusing on being tested, because many of the STIs don't even have any symptoms, or might have their symptoms after a very long period of time. So they are not recognizable by you, and you cannot just wait for symptoms to arise to getting tested. So one should focus on getting tested and getting treated, because these STIs have a profound impact on sexual as well as reproductive health worldwide. Many of these STIs result in basically cancer. Some of these STIs results in you can say small things like genital ulcers and the vaginal discharge. These are very small thing, but these STIs, if not treated, can also lead to child stillbirth, and these can be passed on from mother to child during the birth. So we must not take them this lightly and get tested and get our STIs treated, so that these STIs can also could not lead to any severe viruses. Okay, I got this. How frequently should one get tested? So basically, it totally depends upon your choice. We are no one to tell you, but for sure, if possible, you must get tested after every 3 months. If you are like before, if you are getting out of a relationship and then changing your partner or partners, then also you must be aware of your STI status before engaging with anyone. You must be aware of your STI status. So these are the like point of time that is for sure you must be getting tested and know your partner's STI status too. And it totally depends upon you if it's feasible for you to have your get tested in within 6 months. Once a 6 months, it's okay for that also. If it is not possible for you to get tested every 3 months, then you can just get tested after every 6 months, or like after every year at least one should get tested. Also, these STIs, if not tested and treated, can actually lead to some severe acquisition of other viruses like HIV. And as HIV, I have mentioned a lot of times now, I would like Janvi and Ira to actually throw some insight for it. So, passing over to you guys.
Thank you, Anupriya. So, yeah, I'll just talk a little bit about HIV AIDS, and then Jani would take it on further. So, as we all know, HIV, or the human immunodeficiency virus, it targets the immune system and it weakens people's defense against many infections and some types of cancers as well, that people with a healthy immune system can fight off. So the virus destroys and impairs the function of the immune cells. And because of this, they become immunodeficient. And the most advanced stage of HIV, which all of us also know, is acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, or commonly known as AIDS. It can take many years to develop if it's not treating, depending on the individual that has been infected with it. And it can be defined as something which is a development of certain cancers within the body and certain infections that can have severe consequences. So the basic signs and symptoms of HIV, they can vary depending on the stage of the infection. So initially, during the initial months, HIV can be very infectious, and many people are unaware that they even have it, because of which it gets passed on to more than one person. And in the first few weeks after initial infection, people also do not really experience any symptom, or even if they do, it's something which is pretty common, like fever, or just a sore throat, or like rashes, headache, just that. Many people don't even experience any symptom. So as the infection progressively grows on, it weakens the immune system, and then people infected with it, they can develop other signs also and other symptoms, like they can lose a lot of weight, they can have high fever, diarrhea, and a lot more symptoms. So if it's left untreated for a long time, then it can even lead to other severe illnesses like TB, meningitis, and even some forms of cancer as well. So as we all know, HIV can be transmitted via the exchange of different bodily fluids. These can include exchange of blood, maybe through syringes, breast milk, and through sexual fluids, which are passed on if you're engaged in any type of sexual activity. An HIV positive mother can also pass on the illness to her unborn child during pregnancy. So it can be passed on like that. But I would like to clarify that it can not be passed on through day-to-day activities like just hugging, kissing, or just sharing same food, water. It cannot pass on that way. So some of the basic risk factors which are involved here are, number one is unprotected any type of penetrative sex. Then if you have, like Anupriya also mentioned, if you have any other STI, and if it is left untreated, then it can lead to HIV AIDS as well. Then if you share infected syringes or any type of blood transfusion, or if it has taken place between an infected and a non-infected person, then HIV can be passed on through that as well. So like the basic form of HIV AIDS is passed on through these methods only. And to diagnose it and to find out if you have it, the only way is to get yourself tested. And it's very important to get yourself tested even if you do not really have any symptom. But like Anupriya said, it's important if you're a sexually active person, then it's important to get yourself tested. And there are more things about HIV AIDS which Janvi would explain now. Janvi, oh.
Yes, thank you, Ira. So, as Ira shared, HIV/AIDS has always been subjected to a lot of, stigmatization. So, with this modern technology, HIV/AIDS is something that can be managed, which means that it can be prevented and it can be cured. So, while talking about prevention, there are some key steps that we need to take to lower our risk of exposing ourselves to the virus, and these steps can be used in combination with each other as well as individually. So the first step to prevent is using external and internal condoms, testing and counseling for HIV and STIs, testing and counseling for linkages to tuberculosis care, voluntary medical male circumcision, use of antiretroviral drugs for prevention, harm reduction for people who inject and use drugs, and the last is elimination of mother to child transmission, MTCT, of HIV. So, there are times when we are engaged in casual relationships, and there are times we feel awkward to ask our partner to undergo a test for HIV/AIDS, or if we do, then they kind of reject it, they shut down the idea completely. So in those times, how can you protect yourself? So there is something called PrEP and PEP. So it's basically medicines to prevent HIV. So each medicine, each pill is used for different situation. So PrEP, PrEP, it's something that stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis. So it is for people who are vulnerable to this virus. It's for people who don't have HIV but are at a very high risk of getting it. So PrEP is a daily medicine that can reduce this risk. With PrEP, if you do get exposed to HIV, the medicine can stop HIV from taking hold and spreading throughout your body. So the next is PEP, PEP, which stands for post-exposure prophylaxis. So PEP is for people who already have been exposed to HIV. So it's for emergency situations. So PEP must be started within 72 hours after a possible exposure to HIV. So now, while talking about treatment, There's one very successful, commonly and globally used method called antiretroviral therapy, ART, which is composed of a combination of 3 or more antiretroviral ARV drugs. So, ART, antiretroviral therapy, does not cure HIV infection, but it highly suppresses viral replication within a person's body and allows an individual's immune system to recover, to strengthen and regain the capacity to fight off opportunistic infections and some cancers. So, since 2016, WHO, World Health Organization, has recommended that all the people who are living with HIV should be provided with lifelong ART, including children, adolescents, pregnant women, breastfeeding women, regardless of their clinical status or CD4 cell count. So, since 2001, 187 countries are now using this recommendation, which means 99% of people who are living with HIV are now covered with ART. And 82 low and middle income countries have also reported that they have adopted this policy, and they have implemented this policy countrywide. But of course, a lot of recommendations, a lot of improvements have to be taken, because this ART, this treatment does not fully cover children who deal with HIV. And so, since 2020, a lot of efforts are being taken to cover the population of children who are, exposed to HIV. So, in the end, I just want to say that it's very difficult to find out without testing that whether you have HIV or whether you have been exposed to HIV. So, if you want to take care of yourself, the only method is to test it regularly, and that is the way you can figure out if you have or if you don't have this virus. Anupriya, over to you.
So that was really great listening to you guys, and very well said. As already Janvi mentioned a lot about the preventive measures, but there are small things that I would like to add. People are not like even aware of it, they don't notice it. And while even having like taking preventive measures for being like extra careful, they do things which actually leads to not helping. Because like you many this is like very common, and people even ask this generally to our team, and many times we have also received such doubts on Instagram also, that is it okay to use double condoms just because there might be a leakage in one. So that's actually, I would say, it is not recommendable and it's never helpful. So using double condoms is not okay, and just be with one. And sometimes like people use lubes, and they use latex condoms, and with them they use oil based lubes. So basically these kind of things actually leads to infections in general too. So one must avoid using oil based lubes and actually switch to water lubes, especially when they are using latex condoms. So as well as during oral sex, this can lead to STI very easily. Like if you have brushed your teeth, and just after that you go for oral. So basically you must definitely use some protective sex, but other than that you must actually avoid having oral sex during like not during, but before or just after having doing the oral sex. As well as avoid having oral sex if you have blisters, or you might be having some cuts in your mouth. So basically these are few things that we don't even notice but actually lead to STIs and infections. So this is actually really something helpful. We hope it will be helpful for you. So, are there any doubts, any questions, any one of you having? Have you received any questions, right? Like we already have a few, one or two, but actually, any one of you from like would like to ask any type of question?
Actually, can I add something here before you go with the questions?
Yeah.
Hi. So yeah, there are, I think, two questions which are in the comments also. I think one of them has been answered. You can see the other one which Atumita has asked also. Just to answer that, Atumita, yeah, something like herpes, oral herpes can actually be transmitted by sharing utensils. And when you have oral herpes, you basically get warts inside the mouth and not the genitals. Like oral herpes and herpes of the genitals are two different types of the same infection. So again, with oral herpes, you can transmit it either by sharing of utensils or by kissing, or if you have mouth to genital contact, then you can also pass it on as genital herpes. So it may have started as oral herpes for a person, but it can be transmitted as genital herpes. And again, with something like oral herpes, there is no medicine that completely takes it away, but it can be managed. As is the case with herpes, even any kind of herpes, you get flares. So you have flare-up periods where the warts and the blisters and cuts or whatever form it appears for you are increased, and then you can eat the medicines to manage those symptoms so that you don't transmit them. So you can again identify for yourself that if you're experiencing a flare, then you may want to abstain from certain activities during that time so as to not transmit it. And once the flare is controlled, then again you can freely practice whatever you want to. I'm so sorry, I just hijacked your panel. But hi, I'm Atika. I'm also from Team Tarini, and I think you've all covered everything. And I was just thinking about one thing while we were talking at the beginning, and we were talking about like why should we even be talking about STIs? And it just are there a lot of people who are attending something like this for the first time in the audience? If yes, I remember the first time I attended something like this, and when I first started studying and learning to be an educator, I remember being so scared. Like it was just scary to hear about all this, and you don't want to put yourself in these situations. You don't want to have to deal with any of this. So I think that's where I would say we need to begin with that. It's important to know this because the more you know, the more at ease you will be. Of course, it's a little scary. It can be a little scary anytime you fall sick with any kind of infection. But that is not to say that you shouldn't engage in any of these things. The idea is just to reduce the risk. The second thing being that it's important to talk about this definitely because you can save yourself from so much physical harm. But I also want to talk about the kind of mental toll something like this can take on a person. And it's completely valid. Just, even thinking that what if I've got something? What if I've got something? And there's no answer to that unless and until you can get tested. So I think those are two really important points. The first one, of course, which all three of you covered so beautifully. And the second one being that it is a very, very, very valid pressure on one's mental health as well to sort of be wondering what's happening with your body and not knowing how to do it, or not knowing how to proceed with something that you otherwise enjoy, but you're now feeling scared of. So that was the whole idea of doing this, and talking about STIs in general and a little bit more in detail about HIV, because it is HIV Awareness Month in December. And I hope you all had something new that you learned. And I think I'll pass this back on to the three of you. And if there are any questions from the team, if you've collected any questions, otherwise they can answer the questions they've received already. Please take it from here.
Thank you so much, Artika. I was just about to introduce Artika also, and just then only she came. So even like Artika was telling that the first time she was attending, how was she feeling? Even I attended my first workshop with her only, and she was the educator. And at that time, I know that it was my first workshop, and I was sitting there with my earphones. Ki, oh my God, I don't know. I have to talk about it. I will be talking about it. Karke. And then we were like, okay. So we received. Okay, can we get STD if we are sharing toilet seats with a person who is tested positive for STD. See, basically, toilet seats. In general, too, if you are people avoid using public toilets just because they can catch infections. But at the same time, if that person is in your home, or like it's your partner or anyone, you have been known and you have been sharing your a washroom with them. So basically, you just need to keep your washroom clean in general too, so that you just don't pass it on to anyone else, or you don't get okay, what about hostel toilets? So basically, it's always recommended to use clean washrooms, and it is not always that you will get STD and you will just use it once and you'll get STD. Okay, or you will get, it can be like there can be infections if the toilet is not clean and people don't clean it. Like, even if you are using public washrooms or sharing your washroom with someone else, I would just recommend to first clean it before using it yourself, and even ask your friends to do the same, so there is no chance of STD or STI transmission. But it is not always that you will for sure catch STI and STD. Firstly, it is as usual, I will just focus on getting tested. If you know the status, the STI and STD status of your friends, of yourselves, and you are open about talking to it, so you will not, obviously not get any STI or STD, and there will be no transmission because you will be fully aware and you will take your preventive measures. So it's just that only one need to be aware enough and just maintain hygiene, the basic as well as sexual hygiene.
Yeah, just adding to that, it's actually there are very low chances of actually
Yeah.
acquiring an STI using common toilets or using toilet seats, but because you can acquire an STI through bodily fluids, and if you're completely unaware of what has gone on in that toilet, then you expose yourself to a little bit of risk, but it's very rare. However, having said that, for people, especially people with vaginas, it's very, very common to acquire UTIs using shared toilet seats, whether it's in a hostel or a public toilet. It's actually very, very common to get a urinary tract infection, which can be, again, in the form of many types. It could be bacterial, it could be a yeast infection, it could be of many types. And that can lead to, of course, infections of the urinary bladder as well. With respect to STIs, usually very, very low.
Yeah.
Also, there was another question somebody had asked, the difference
Yes.
between STI and STD.
Oh, that has been covered.
As I
That
mentioned,
has been covered
Oh, okay.
yeah,
before the topic began. So there's another question by Rashmi. Do you feel there is a particular age to start teaching students about sexual health, or in general sex education? Because in schools till now we don't see this as a part of syllabus. Yeah, in India we don't have sex education, unfortunately. But I feel, it's my personal view that sexual education and sexual health in general should be taught to students before the onset of puberty, because once we are in that zone of puberty, there are so many questions. Everyone, whether it's male or females, we all undergo such inquisitiveness. We undergo a feeling of insecurity. There are a lot of questions. There are a lot of there's a turmoil that goes on. So I feel the best age is before the onset of puberty. Anyone can add to that.
I would like to add to that. So I feel having any sexual feeling or anything, it's a part of your life. It's a need. Like, you feel hungry, you eat food, you get thirsty, you drink water. Same in that way, sexual experiencing anything sexual, it's a need that and I feel, like Janvi said, that before you hit puberty, it should be talked about, and kids should know that this is completely normal and that this is something that people engage in, and there's nothing to be ashamed about. So I feel we, especially in India, there's it's high time that we have proper sex education in our schools, so that the kids know what sex is, what all it includes, what all to do, what all not to do. Because when they don't, then they grow up, and then there are different sources through which they try to find out information, and then all sorts of chaos and confusion takes place. So I feel it's very important.
I have a
Absolutely.
follow-up
And just, I'm so sorry, Karen, please go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, so do you think such education sections should it happen for boys and girls together? Because usually when schools take it up, they like split them up into two different classrooms and then do it. So what is your opinion on that?
Absolutely. Actually, schools don't really do sex education. When they talk about periods, they split you up. Is that what you're referring to?
I guess that and just the general changes that take
Right.
place during puberty. Yeah.
Right. Just adding to that, sex education is so much beyond what we spoke about today. Today, we spoke about, of course, a very specific section within the sex education umbrella, which was STIs and HIV in particular. But sex education is everything starting from like gender to bodily changes to hormonal changes to physical growth to what even puberty is, to what your body parts are, consent, pleasure, so much, right? So the idea that we really, really try putting forth anytime a parent reaches out to us or a school reaches out to us is that sex education can be made age appropriate. So when we say you can start it off as young as 3 years old, obviously we don't mean that you should go and teach your 3-year-old about pleasure and about having partnered sex. We mean that you can start teaching them by talking about body parts, because so many times shaming begins at home, and shaming begins at such an early age when when you even if it's like really small things, when you keep saying personal part, private part, personal part, private part, and that's when the stigmatization begins of certain body parts, when it's equally wrong for a person to non-consensually touch just about any other body part as well. So the idea is that, of course, in the larger future, sex education can be made age appropriate, and that means that you deliver topics to different people of different age groups in a different way. So right when kids start learning and they start understanding a little bit of things, 3 years old, they start school. So right from then you can start talking about gender. For example, why are we still in 2021 continuing to say boys and girls when we do recognize gender as a non-binary? And it can begin at school. Of course, this is very easy to say and much more difficult to adapt, because with something like this to happen in school, teachers in school themselves need to be trained, or the schools need to be willing to accept help from outside. Parents themselves need to be sensitized towards so many things. But having said that, you can basically start off at any age. So many times we tell people that when we do our basics of sex ed workshops, you're most welcome to join at any age, because you could be as old as I am, you could be 20 something years old and not have basic knowledge because you've never had the opportunity to learn it before, and that's fine. But if you do happen to have access to the learning process of someone who's a child, who's a baby, who's in that growing up phase, you can take the responsibility to start teaching them small things right from a very early age, and then going on adding to it. It's a lot like when we do math. You start with addition, subtraction, and then you move on to the next chapter and the next more complex things. But it's not like you don't ever need the addition, subtraction. You do need it. So just in that sense, make it a more gradual learning curve. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
even I would like to add to it that Karan asked for the like having this sex ed session both with boys and girls. It actually helps boys as well as girls to develop as a person, because if I am aware of myself but I am not even aware of, I don't even know a small thing about boys, about their sexuality, about their not just sexuality, about their biological needs, requirements, as well as how it happens, what is going on in their mind and in their body. So as a person, I think I need to be aware for them. Like there are many posts on Instagram and people are really talking about how other people don't understand about the menstruation and the cramps, the pain the girls go through. But at the same time, if we don't even try to educate other people and other personalities, other boys, also about the same thing, about what is going on to about what is going on with girls, and girls don't know about what is going on with boys and any other person, I would say, any other sexuality. So basically it also harms our society as a social person. It would not help in any way, because as a girl I would not be able to understand the situation of a boy, and as a boy he will not be able to understand the situation of a girl. And what if a boy is at the level of puberty, at the age of puberty, people are really exploring and figuring out their sexuality actually. So one might actually figure out due to attending that workshop for girls and boys both, because this is not just about girls and boys. It actually, there are many more sexualities, there is LGBTQ. So it helps every one of us, and it is more inclusive if we talk and educate everyone together, and not just differently, treat everyone differently, right?
That's great. Thank you so much for adding that. Because there are 10 minutes left, I'll just quickly answer the next questions, which are all related to testing. So first was how to get tested, and then there are some more which are like, are there any at home STI tests, or are there any kits which one can use at home? So first of all, like, the easiest way to get tested in India right now is to book it from Lal Path Lab, because there are lots of labs doing it, of course, but Lal is just one which is credible. It's there in a lot of cities. Their tests can be banked upon, even though the test itself will also state that there is a chance that it's a false test. But generally speaking, the infrastructure is good enough, and their tests you can rely on. If you log on to their websites, they have two packages called STD Panel 1 and STD Panel 2. You can read each of the packages and see what all tests are included. So these STD Panel 1 and 2 include tests for a range of STIs, including HIV. And other than this, they also obviously have the option to test individually for each separate STI, like HIV separately or chlamydia separately. Usually, these are blood tests, like STD Panel 1 and 2 are both blood tests, but certain STIs like gonorrhea, chlamydia can also be tested using urine sample, depending on how you're placed, what the doctor suggests, etc. You don't need a doctor's prescription to get these tests done. You can simply go on their website, book a test, or go into a collection center and give your sample and discreetly get your report. They usually deliver your report online. So again, it's very discreet, and if you don't want to share it with too many people, that's also okay. So yeah, that's super reliable. The other thing is that if you're like unsure about what you want to even get done, you can definitely see a doctor. Now it's a little bit sketchy, because a lot of times doctors in India don't recommend you get tested. They straight away give you the medicine. Like we were talking, a lot of the infections are as simple as a simple cold, so you need to be on a 3-day antibiotic course and you're fine. So a lot of times doctors in India don't actually tell you to go get tested. They just give you the medicine and they just hope for the best and assume that you will be fine after those 3 day of the medicine course. So again, it's completely your call. Of course, we definitely always suggest getting tested and then taking the medicine, just for no other reason, just for knowing that you did have something, or you're now okay, or however you want to go about it. Having said that, tests can be expensive. Like if you get tests done individually, it's obviously lesser compared to getting a panel in one go. So depending on how much you want to spend, what is your budget situation like, you can choose to do one test a month as well, which should cost you up to 500 rupees a month doing just one test. If you do the panel, it comes out to lesser, but your one-time out-of-pocket cost increases. Other than that, I would just share with you that we are working with a company which is helping us put together at-home tests. And as soon as that's out, we'll share it on our Instagram. So please be with us on our Instagram, and you'll get to know what's happening in that sense. The next question is at-home testing, right? So currently India doesn't have any at-home STI tests. There are again 2 companies that we know of that are trying to work on getting tests, at-home tests to India. They do exist abroad, but India doesn't have them. Like there's no company that's making them right now. Other than that, for people with vaginas, there is a company called Vagi Check that we worked with and we've tested samples of. They do a vaginal testing kit. It's an at-home vaginal testing kit. Now, it doesn't tell you if you have an STI or not. It just tells you if your vaginal pH is normal or not. So in case your vaginal pH is not normal, that's kind of like an indication that you may have something. It could be an STI. It could also just be a urine infection. It could also just be an infection of the urinary tract, reproductive tract. It just kind of gives you that indication that something is not fine. And then you can follow that up with a lab test. And yeah, that's the whole idea of it. Does that answer the question?
I hope that does.
Yes,
We have one
yes,
more
it does.
question come through the chat. Who was asking about how our eating habits affect our reproductive health.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, it was asking about how our eating habits affect our reproductive
health. Definitely. I don't know if this is something you're reading from Cosmo, because there are like a lot of articles which talk about, oh, if you eat this, your vagina is going to smell better, or like flowers or something. So if this is, yeah, pineapples. I mean, well, there is some fact in the pineapple thing being true, but like two things that I would say here would be that one, obviously your body has a very particular kind of smell, each part of your body, and that's fine. That's how it's supposed to be. So, you know, that's something you need to learn and understand for yourself, that you don't need to go the extra mile for your vagina to smell like something, or your penis to smell like something, or, you know, for your semen to taste like something, for example. These are the articles that, you know, magazines cover. Having said that, there are things that you can do for your reproductive health in terms of reproduction. So again, there's no particular set of things that you should eat, etc. But generally speaking, at an age group that you're all at, or that we're all at, which is, you know, early 20s or coming into 20s and mid 20s, it's supposed to be a very, very crucial time for your body and not just your reproductive system. Because I mean, like, sadly, so it's said that like post your 25th year, it's your age is 25, and after that your health is just declining. So it's a given and understood thing amongst nutritionists that your 20s, what you eat in your 20s, basically shapes up your life for the rest of your life. So, you know, just basic stuff like you need to have good nutrition. And this also happens to be the time that we all party a lot, we all eat out a lot. And, you know, maybe we don't know what we're eating, or some people want to go on diets and, you know, have a very specific, limited amount of food. So the only thing to kind of remember here for your reproductive health as well as general health is that this is the time you really need to be eating well, and you really need to be eating balanced. Like, I think your whole life you hear that eat nutrients, but this is really it. Like, you need to be having your calcium, because this is going to define what your bones feel like for the rest of the time. You need to get your micronutrients, like magnesium is really, really important for reproduction and other functions in the body as well. You need to have your fair share of proteins as well. So nothing specifically that I would say for reproductive health. I also don't believe in a lot of the fad diets. But having said that, it does, what you eat in your 20s does shape up what the rest of your body feels like for the rest of.
Thank you very much. We'll just take up one more question from the chat box. It's coming. If both partners are negative, then why is there a need to test regularly?
Do you want me to answer that, or the three of you?
It's your choice. Even I can. You just add after I finish. Is it okay?
Go ahead. Go ahead. We'll add to
Okay.
it.
So basically, if both the partners are negative, and I would still say there is a need to get test, because Firstly, it is important because you are sexually active person. You are regularly having sex, and you are regularly having contact with other person's fluid. So even if like, although it is said that it's okay if you not the other partner, if you not get test, if you have just one partner throughout your lifetime, but that is also actually not okay. Just if you are really very sure about your partner that they are not engaging with other person, then it's okay, because you are aware of the other person's, your body is aware with other person's fluids, and um, uh, the other person's fluids are also aware by are like, other person is also aware of your own fluids. But basically it is also recommended, because every time it is you exploring more and more with your partner, and you might even change your partner, so you don't even know by what small thing the STIs can be acquired or can be transmitted. So it is important to get tested for your own well-being, for your own health. And also, if you're not getting tested, so you are also putting other person's health at stake too. And like, Janvi can add more to it.
Having said that, in this scenario, in such a scenario, the thing that changes is, instead of getting tested after every 3 months so frequently, you can get tested once a year. When both of you, both the partners, have tested negative. So instead of going into the lab regularly, after every 3 months, quarterly, you can get tested once a year. If you're sure you both are not engaging, if you're sure you both are exclusive and not engaging not engaging with other people.
Absolutely. Like, I think this is beyond, we get this question so many times, and this is beyond a question of sexual health to also being a question of trust, which, we are not at liability to answer, and we're not the right people to answer. So you really have to judge your situation on your own. If you feel like you are each other's only partners and you're 100% sure of that, that's great then. And if you both tested negative, in case you had partners before and you both now tested negative, you're more or less in a safe spot. We would say that if you are a cis male and a cis female couple, then even then to use some sort of contraception or protection. The other thing is that it's like Janvi said, you don't have to then do regular tests maybe every 3 months, and you can just, for checking in on yourself, do it once in a larger period of time. Again, this is not something that you should stick to our word by, that like, oh, they said that if you're both negative, you don't need to test because you know your situation the best. Are you sure that there's no sharing of needles happening, for example? I know this is being recorded, so like I won't go into so much detail, but there are people who use substance. And again, that's a personal choice that we're not going to comment on here. But are you sure there's no other exchange of fluids that has happened with somebody else over a period of time? If you're in between partners and you've tested negative, are you sure both of you got your test done in the right STI time period? For example, like if you don't get it done in the right window, it can show up as a false negative. So you are like the best person to judge your situation and then apply the information that's been shared here today. And that's essentially the idea, that we're nobody to tell you that you should do this or you should do that, or you should do a certain thing in a certain way. All we can share with you is that this is the information, and yes, the negative test is good, and if you're both negative, then that's great. But you're the one who should be judging your situation and making a decision accordingly.
Yeah, ultimately it's about your choice and what you're comfortable with. Nobody can force you to do something you don't want to. So
Thank you all so much. Since we've come to the end, I'll give a concluding note. On behalf of the Biology Society, I'd extend heartfelt thanks to Anupriya, Janvi, and Arpita. We thank the Tanvi Foundation not just for whatever you shared with us today, but for the work you do for our society at large. And we'd like to tell you that we hope that we won't be breaking the chain. Whatever we learned today, we'll be conveying further in our circles as well. So again, thank you all once again. And of course, to the audience as well for putting in your questions and adding more value to the session. I'll put in the links to join the Biology Society and find more information again, and as well as the feedback form for the session. Right now, I request all of you to turn on your cameras so we can take some pictures as a reminder of this session.
So I'm so sorry, I'm traveling. So what I'll do is that I'm just gonna leave the call and then you can all take a screenshot of pictures. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, that is fine. Like if your name is
Yeah, you
displayed
can
also,
just
that's
stay
fine.
with your video off
Okay,
too.
great,
At
great.
least we
Okay,
have Kartika Singh.
yeah, and like right before we end, we'd love to hear feedback, of course, and the team can pass it
Yeah.
along to us over email. And you can also follow us at Team Tarini on Instagram. I'll just put it in the chat box. And the only reason like we keep updating information as and when we learn, and everything that we spoke about today will be probably available on the page itself in smaller portions in different formats. So you can definitely take a look at it. And we also open up the page for interactions every week in case you have more questions that you want to ask. Thank you so much. You can please go ahead and take a picture.
Okay. Whoever can, just quickly turn on your cameras. Okay. Rhythm, if you're taking it, just let us know.
Everyone would be just smiling like that, and the person has just not taken a screenshot. But personally, thank you so much, the Biology Society, for this workshop and for this opportunity. And all of us, Ira, me, Janvi, every one of us were really excited for this workshop. It is our first, as Janvi mentioned earlier.
Yes.
So I hope it helped
Thank
you
you
all.
so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for
Yeah,
being
it
so
was a
patient.
great session, guys.
Thank you. Everyone was so
Thank you.
patient, so kind. Thank you so much.
everyone for joining.